I'm Sam Lake, the creative director of Remedy, co-directing Alan Wake 2, and I'm also the lead writer in the project.
And I'm Molly Maloney. I am principal narrative designer on Alan Wake 2.
So can we talk about this 13-year gap between the original Alan Wake and now, and why is now the good time to bring this series back?
We always wanted to create a sequel. We have tried it many times, and the concept has evolved through the years. Now, finally, things just clicked into place on many fronts. Creating Control, our previous game, we wanted to set that into the same universe as Alan Wake. So we were inserting elements of Alan Wake into it. Around the same time, we got the publishing rights of the original Alan Wake game back, which gave us an opportunity to create a remastered version of the original game, multi-platform this time, because the original game was on Xbox and then later on PC. Now it's on PlayStation as well. And all of these elements coming together and getting a publishing deal made with Epic Games for the sequel. Then for Control, second downloadable episode, we kind of openly created this big crossover event between Control and Alan Wake, setting up the sequel. So time just was right.
Because what did you learn from Control that you brought with you into Alan Wake 2? And it can be creatively, mechanically, narratively, whatever.
Yeah, we do like to take the learnings from the previous one. Structure was one. Control was less linear and more hub-based in design. We really wanted to do that in this one as well. That I would feel was pretty much the biggest part in it. Then there are smaller elements like how we ended up using stylization and how we ended up using live action content in Control, blending it on top of the game footage in a vision-like way, as an example, and go on way further with that in this one.
Yeah, I definitely think that, it's so weird, I'm going to hold it. I definitely think that, Control was a more open format. And when returning to Alan Wake, we wanted to make sure this is a narrative experience, but how do we take the things that were really working from that and create kind of these crafted hub spaces that still pull the player through the narrative. And so exploration is really an important part of the game, but I would say, and I'm looking at you, Sam, but I don't think it's quite as open as, say, Control was.
Yeah, this one is more story focused, and that kind of changes the approach. We really went into Control gameplay first, and then added a story, whereas this one is very much story focused. And what are the new things in this one? Well, first it's a survival horror game, but also we wanted to bring the storytelling closer to the gameplay than ever before. And with that, we've introduced quite a bit of gameplay mechanics that are about story and discovering the story.
Yeah, I think one last thing to add about that is, because this was a story-first project, the characters were actually able to inspire the gameplay in that way. That is not to say that wasn't the case on Control, but when you start with story, you can kind of, as you get to know those characters, say like, oh, this is what she would do, or I bet we could make something out of this. So I think that was a really natural evolution from the previous game.
So for both of you, you can switch between Saga and Alan at any time in the story. How does that affect your narrative, or if you can go back and forth as you please?
Can I start?
Is that hard?
It's not hard. It is a challenge. When you go into designing nonlinear narrative, you just have to think about it differently. So it's like we started off with the knowledge that the player was going to be able to kind of pop between the two storylines. So how do you construct a story that is not meant to be experienced in one specific way, but instead how you play is meaningful. It provides different context to what you're experiencing, so the order in which you experience the information impacts the story as you perceive it, which incidentally is exactly where the characters are. You know, like they're learning things at different times too, and that's kind of impacting their perspective on the situation. Both Alan and Saga's stories they kind of mirror and echo each other in ways that even those two characters don't fully understand.
Yeah, we are hoping that this kind of an approach. Well, first of all, there is no wrong way to play through this game. With this kind of like giving the player a freedom to switch between the characters and experience it in the order that they choose. We are also hoping that because there is so much detail and discovery there, that once you have completed the game once, you can go back and play it again now in different order, and maybe that will give you further insights, or even something that didn't click into place or you didn't even notice on the first playthrough, you are now getting it from a different point of view.
Alan Wake is an interesting game in general because it's grounded, but leans into supernatural elements heavily as well. It's some inspirations for the new narrative. You guys pull from, like, I'm old, so X-Files, I've got X-Files vibes for sure, that kind of stuff. A little bit of noir in there as well.
Yeah, that's there. Inspirations that were there already for the first Alan Wake. Definitely part of this Stephen King's works. We have a horror writer at the center of it. Twin Peaks was a big part of the inspiration for the original one. Here, going more intentionally and deeper into horror, certainly kind of modern and classic art house horror films that are more about psychological side of it and atmosphere side of it. Hereditary, Midsommar, Witch, Lighthouse, these kinds of films where stylization and horror as a story that kind of like grows in intensity, rather than horror as a spectacle where you just have a lot of blood and shocks. We are more leaning on atmosphere, but then the detective side of it and FBI investigating serial killings essentially as a starting point obviously goes all the way back to, say, Silence of the Lambs, but in a more modern way, True Detective.
Molly, can you talk a little about the balance between keeping a grounded story about following this detective through her journey and then blending supernatural elements? Because it is a game, you do want to have fun, but you don't want to go so overboard on either side where it's too grounded or too crazy, right?
Well, I think you're right. I think that you have to ease people into an experience. One of the things that's really important in designing for this is to kind of put the player in the same shoes as the character. So for Saga, she arrives at Bright Falls. She's here to solve these string of ritual killings. She's here with her partner, Alex Casey, and she's known for taking on impossible cases. But obviously, as she digs into what's going on here, she's going to see things that make less and less logical and rational sense to her. So when we were designing the mechanics for Saga, because there's a lot about her that's really thoughtful and introspective as she puts together the pieces, that was a really important part. Actually, in the case board, which is this visual representation of the investigation Saga's conducting, she has this special skill where she can kind of withdraw into herself as a focus technique. When you're in there and you're placing these clues, you can actually hover over them and see her thoughts on the clues. You get this additional context of kind of what she's thinking about them as you place them. So I think it's a combination of, we want to impart this very gradual seeding of these supernatural elements and build that sense of tension, which is so important in the survival horror, but while also providing that valuable context of where is the player character's head at as she's kind of perceiving this, and what is she making of this. And I mean, it kind of brings it back to if you're old, I'm old too, because I also love X-Files, and there's a Scully quality to that.
There really is. It's something I didn't realize I missed until I saw the demo today.
Yeah, no, she's pretty cool. But yeah, I think she's certainly capable of handling this, but the way that any normal person would handle it, which is just what the heck is going on?
There's got to be a logical explanation for this, right?
Yes, surely.
Speaking of that, the mind place is such a fascinating mechanic in general. Seamlessly tapping in and out of that. I don't even know how you guys did that. Just at press of a button instantly in a different area, different zone where you have manage everything. I mean, can you talk about how that idea came to fruition of just having to be able to go to the separate place at any time?
Yeah, I mean, really early on in the project, we knew that we want a case board. We knew that we want profiling suspects, but whether to go with the mind place or some other way, it's just when the thrill ride side of this gets going, it became very clear that, well, having the logic of now she travels to the physical place of their field office in the small town of Bright Falls, yeah, that's not going to happen. There won't be opportunity to this. And more then, well, okay, memory palace, mind palace technique, obviously also familiar from pop culture that we are drawing from in any case, Sherlock as an example, just the idea of a genius detective, and then just like tonally finding personality from her that is part of that. And well, current technology. Finally, we are technology-wise in a place where we can stream content in a way where if we switch the place, we are immediately there and out again.
Yeah, we've had some engine updates to Northlight that have really allowed it, but also, it's just like modern technology really allows us to do that rapid switching. I think it's really cool. As Sam said, yeah, a lot of this kind of is inspired by, okay, this is the fantasy we want the player to have. What is the coolest presentation for that fantasy? In this case, it was like, well, as Sam said, right? Like, I don't want to actually get in my car and drive all the way back to the field office so I can place this darn clue on the...
Bring a suspect in and take them to the field office.
Well, what would be really cool? And so you kind of start, and I mean, that's the magic of video games too, right? Where it's like, what is the coolest thing for the player to do? Not necessarily the thing that makes sense. And of course, because this is a surreal and psychological horror game too, there's like, we kind of draw on those themes in the presentation of that. But it was iterative process of like, how do we make this cooler and cooler? And that's where we landed.
You talk about the balance between crafting a narrative that a player will experience for listening to VO or finding clues, and then the combat segments, and how you work with the designers on that side to make sure there's a nice balance between the two.
That was a big part of reasoning why we wanted to make a survival horror game out of this. And because the first Alan Wake is an action-adventure game. Yes, the story has horror elements, but it's action-adventure and a lot of combat involved, and the gameplay mechanic focusing on combat. And here we wanted more focus on the story and bring the storytelling closer to gameplay. And what survival horror allowed us to do is that we can have less combat, we can have much more build-up to every encounter, make every encounter a bigger event in itself, but also bring in these other elements like the mind plays and gameplay around investigation into it. It's slower paced horror experience as a kind of a basic setup, and we just felt that this is the right way to go. It will be much more tied together on all aspects because they are built into this kind of pacing from the get-go.
Well, and if I can too, I think what is in a horror game being scared is the goal, or at least is often perceived as the goal. But what is worse than being scared? It's almost the anticipation of being scared. So a lot of this started with, okay, how do we build tension and atmosphere, not just through the narrative, but through the environment, et cetera, et cetera. And then even in the combat, we see this where it's like, okay, Saga is a very capable fighter. She's an FBI agent. She's been trained, but it is she's fighting against supernatural creatures. So she's doing her best, but it is very challenging. And so making that combat feel really desperate and telling the story of that character was a core part when our game design team was working on how that feels. And of course, Alan's combat also feels different as well, but we'll talk about it later this summer.
Well, talk about what's the biggest challenge for doing a narrative-driven game, just writing the story for it in 2023, and does technology open up for you more creatively, or is it just a story is a story no matter where we are in tech?
Story is a story, for sure. I don't know. We like partly I think it was because we were trying to get this game done for so long, and I feel that every iteration of the concept, we just wanted to be more ambitious. So what we have ended up is clearly our most ambitious game at Remedy, a biggest game as well, and we wanted this to be very story focused. We wanted to create a very layered, ambitious story in itself, a psychological horror story involving two main characters, and then we wanted also to bring new elements into the structure of it, how you experience this interactive story and what are the storytelling elements. So that all of that, of course, then added complexity on the level of like, what are these gameplay elements that we bring in so that the player is actively engaged and playing through the story. So yes, it was a lot of work, a lot of iteration and discovery, but that does not change the fact that yes, kind of like just crafting an interesting, exciting story with these characters in this setting, that's at the heart of it still.
Well, anything to add to that?
I mean, Sam did a really nice job with it. No, I think like new technology always opens up new opportunities. There's certainly things that we can do right now that we could not do 13 years ago. I think we can tell so much about psychological horror is about, as we were talking about, atmosphere and visual fidelity and all these different things. And now is the best time for that. Like, technology has never been better, literally, by definition. So I think that there is a lot more. It can also be, you have to be careful about it, though. Like, it's easy to overreach if you're not careful. So I think that what you have spent 13 years working on, I feel like it's sorry, but you know what I mean. It's just I think that it's the game that it needed to be right now. And it is making the best use of the technology we've got.
One thing maybe to add still is that what the technology allows us is that having great actors in it, performing the roles as these characters, the fidelity of what we can capture and what we can put on the screen, kind of the nuances of emotions and that performance, it's better than ever before. So that in itself is a huge and continuing leap forward in storytelling. Having a great actor and their performance is such a core part of great storytelling.
Yeah, you had the original Alan Wake actor to come back too, which is awesome.
Yes, Ilkka Villi as the physical actor of Alan Wake and Matthew Porretta as the voice of Alan Wake. That was like always the starting point that we want to bring them back, and they were happy to come back. Yeah.
And then when does the game come out, and what platforms will it be on at launch?
The game will be out on October 17th. It will be on PlayStation 5, PC via the Epic Game Store, Xbox Series S and X.